Mechanic fired after 30 years. Weeks later, he returns and everyone freezes. Frank Sullivan had spent 30 years in the same garage. 30 years of grease-stained hands, busted knuckles, and long nights under the hood of a car. He had built that place from the ground up, turning a small-town auto shop into one of the most trusted names in the city. Customers did not just come for repairs. They came because they knew Frank would not cheat them. But none of that mattered today, because today he was being thrown out like garbage. Frank stood in front of Greg Miller's desk, the man who had taken over the shop after Old Man Carter passed away. Greg was younger, sharp-dressed, and cared more about profit margins than people. He leaned back in his expensive chair, tapping his pen against the desk. "I am sorry, Frank. Business is business." His tone was casual, like he was asking Frank to pass the salt at dinner. Frank clenched his jaw. 30 years, Greg. I trained half the guys in that shop. I kept this place running when Carter got sick. And you are just letting me go? Greg sighed like this was exhausting for him. Look, you are great at what you do, no doubt. But times are changing. We need younger mechanics who can work faster, take lower wages. I have investors to answer to. It is not personal. Not personal. Frank felt a tightness in his chest, but he refused to let Greg see it. He would not give him the satisfaction. "So, what now?" Frank asked, his voice steady. "You expect me to pack up my tools and walk out like I was never here?" Greg shrugged. "Pretty much. There is a severance package, a few months' pay. Consider it a thank you for your service." Frank let out a slow breath. His hands balled into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. Greg was not worth losing his dignity over. He turned, heading for the door. But just before he stepped out, he stopped. He looked over his shoulder, his voice low but firm. "You just made the worst mistake of your life." Greg chuckled, shaking his head. "We will see about that." Frank walked out without looking back. By the time he got to his station, his toolbox was already packed. His name, the one that had been on a plaque above his workspace for decades, was gone. Erased. The younger mechanics barely made eye contact as he walked by. Some of them looked guilty, others relieved it was not them. Outside, the cold wind hit his face as he stepped into the parking lot. His old truck sat in the same spot it always had, but this time it felt different. He was not coming back. Frank threw his toolbox into the truck bed and got in. He gripped the steering wheel, staring ahead. 30 years of his life gone in minutes. He turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. He had no idea what came next. Frank drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring past his windshield. His hands stayed tight on the wheel, his knuckles white. 30 years in one place, and now he had nowhere to go. The thought burned in his chest like a fire he could not put out. He had not just lost a job, he had lost his purpose. He finally pulled into the driveway of his small house, the same one he had lived in for 20 years. The porch light flickered as he stepped out of the truck, toolbox in hand. Inside, the silence hit him hard. No sound of an engine running, no smell of oil or metal, just emptiness. He set his toolbox down on the kitchen table and sank into a chair. His hands ran through his graying hair. He had never planned for this. He had always thought he would retire from that garage, maybe train a new generation, pass down the knowledge he had built over the years. But Greg had taken that from him in seconds. His eyes landed on an old photo hanging on the wall. It was him and Carter, the original owner of the shop, standing in front of the garage when they first opened it. Carter had been more than a boss. He had been a mentor, a friend, someone who had believed in hard work and loyalty. If he were alive today, he would be ashamed of what had happened. Frank clenched his jaw and looked away. He needed to figure out what was next. The next morning, he woke up early out of habit. His body was used to the routine, getting dressed, heading to the shop, working until his hands ached. But today, there was nowhere to go. He sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, staring at his calloused hands. He had never done anything else. Then a thought crossed his mind. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There had to be someone, some shop, some old friend who needed a mechanic. One by one, he called the numbers. One by one, he got the same answer. "We are not hiring. Budgets are tight. We will keep you in mind." Frank exhaled sharply, setting the phone down. He had never felt this useless in his life. That afternoon, he drove around town, stopping by every shop he could find. Some places had kids barely out of school working the bays. Others had owners who looked at his age and saw a liability, not an asset. Hours passed, and hope drained from him with every rejection. As he sat in his truck outside the last shop on his list, something caught his eye. A small, run-down garage on the edge of town. The sign was faded, barely readable, and the lot was empty. But Frank recognized the name. It had belonged to an old mechanic he used to know, someone who had been around as long as him. He pulled into the lot, curiosity tugging at him. The building looked abandoned, but the door was unlocked. Inside, the place was a mess. Dust-covered tools, broken-down cars, and an air of neglect. It looked like no one had worked here in years. And then an idea sparked in his mind. He had spent 30 years building someone else's business. Maybe it was time to build his own. Frank stood in the middle of the dusty garage, his boots planted firmly on the cracked concrete floor. The place smelled like old oil and forgotten potential. He ran a hand over a rusted toolbox, his fingers tracing the outline of something that had once been great but had been left to rot. He could feel it in his bones. This place had history, the kind that could not be bought, only earned. For years, he had put his sweat and soul into making Greg's shop the best in town. And where had that gotten him? Tossed aside, forgotten. But this place, this was different. Frank walked to the garage door and shoved it open. The sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust swirling in the air. He could almost see it, the way it could be. Cars lined up outside, people bringing their vehicles to someone they could trust. A mechanic who would not cheat them. His own shop. The thought made his pulse quicken. But then reality settled in. It was a wreck. The equipment was outdated, the lift was rusted, and who knew if the wiring even worked? It would take more money than he had just to get it running. And then there was the biggest problem. Customers. How would he get people to trust a new shop when Greg's business had a chokehold on the entire town? Most of Frank's old customers still went there, and Greg would make sure none of them left. Frank exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe he was just chasing a dream that was never going to happen. Then he heard the sound of tires rolling up outside. His stomach tensed. No one should be here. He stepped outside and saw an old man climbing out of a beat-up pickup truck. His clothes were worn, his face weathered, but Frank recognized him instantly. Tom Reed. Frank had not seen him in years, but he had once been a legend in the industry. He had owned a shop back in the day, one that people drove miles just to visit because they knew he was the best. Frank had learned a lot from watching him work. Tom leaned against the truck, eyeing Frank with a knowing smirk. Word around town is, you got kicked to the curb. Frank crossed his arms. News travels fast. Tom chuckled. Always does in a town like this. His gaze shifted toward the garage. So what's the plan? Frank hesitated. I do not know if I have one. Tom scoffed. That is not the Frank Sullivan I know. You are the best damn mechanic in this town. Always have been. Frank let out a slow breath. Even if I fix this place up, no one is going to come. Greg has already taken them all. Tom nodded as if he had expected that answer. Then he walked to the back of his truck, lifted the tailgate, and pulled out a battered toolbox. I say we change that. Frank frowned. We? Tom grinned. I might be old, but I still know my way around an engine, and I have got something Greg does not. Frank raised an eyebrow. Tom patted the toolbox. Loyal customers who have been waiting for a reason to leave that place. Frank felt something stir in his chest. Maybe this could work. Frank stood there staring at Tom, the weight of the moment sinking in. This was not just some passing conversation. Tom meant business. And if there was one thing Frank had learned in his 30 years as a mechanic, it was that men like Tom did not waste time on lost causes. Frank exhaled, glancing back at the dusty garage. You really think people will come here? Tom smirked. They will if they know you are running it. People are tired of Greg's nonsense. They just need an excuse to walk away. Frank wanted to believe that, but starting a shop from the ground up was no small feat. It required money, tools, equipment, things he did not have. Tom must have read his mind. He opened his toolbox and pulled out a faded checkbook. I got some savings. Not much, but enough to get this place running. Frank's eyes widened. Tom, I can't take your money. You are not taking it. I am investing in a shop that actually cares about people. You fix the cars, I will handle the business side. Tom clapped a hand on Frank's shoulder. We will make this work. Frank swallowed hard. He had spent the last 2 weeks feeling like his life was over. But here was Tom handing him a lifeline. A second chance. He looked at the garage one more time, picturing it not as the rundown mess it was, but as the thriving shop it could be. He turned back to Tom. All right, let's do this. And just like that, the spark was lit. For the next few days, Frank and Tom got to work. They cleaned out the garage, scrubbing years of dust and grime from every surface. Tom made calls to old contacts, securing deals on used equipment. Frank spent hours repairing the rusted lift, rewiring the lights, and making sure everything in the shop was functional. Word started to spread. A few of Frank's old customers stopped by, curious. They watched as he worked, remembering why they had trusted him for years. Then one morning, a woman pulled up in a minivan, her face tense with worry. I heard you were open. My car's been making a noise, but Greg's shop told me it would take 2 weeks just to look at it. Frank nodded. Pop the hood. Within minutes, he diagnosed the issue. A loose belt, a 10-minute fix. When he handed the keys back, she was stunned. Greg told me I needed a full repair. He was going to charge me hundreds. Frank wiped his hands on a rag. You are good to go. No charge for something that small. Her eyes filled with gratitude. I am telling everyone about this place. And she did. Within hours, more cars started rolling in. People came in complaining about how Greg had overcharged them, how he had pushed unnecessary repairs. Frank and Tom worked tirelessly, fixing cars honestly and fairly. The trust was coming back. But Greg was not happy. That evening, as Frank locked up, a black luxury car pulled into the lot. The door swung open, and out stepped Greg. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with something Frank could not quite place. Greg took a slow step forward. So, this is what you have been up to. Frank crossed his arms. You seem surprised. Greg smirked, but there was no humor in it. You made a mistake, old man. Tom stepped up beside Frank. The only mistake was thinking you could keep running a business by cheating people. Greg's jaw tightened. You are not going to last. Frank met his stare. We will see about that. Greg chuckled darkly, then climbed back into his car and drove off. Tom exhaled. He is not done yet. Frank nodded. He knew Greg too well. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Frank arrived at the shop early, but something felt off. As he stepped closer, his stomach twisted. The front door was wide open. The lock had been busted. His heart pounded as he rushed inside. Tools were scattered everywhere. Drawers yanked open. The register was missing. His toolbox, the one he had owned for decades, was gone. Tom ran in behind him, stopping dead in his tracks. No! He scanned the wreckage, his face tightening with rage. Frank clenched his fists. He knew exactly who had done this. Greg. It was the only explanation. Greg had seen the shop rising, customers leaving his garage to come here. He had warned Frank that he would not last. And now this. Tom kicked a broken chair aside. We need to call the cops. Frank exhaled sharply, shaking his head. We have no proof. He will deny everything. Tom was fuming. So we just let this go? Frank looked around at the destruction, his chest heavy. No, they would not let it go. By noon, word had spread through town. Customers arrived, gasping at the state of the shop. One woman, Mrs. Carter, crossed her arms. Greg did this, didn't he? Frank did not confirm it, but his silence was enough. People whispered, shaking their heads in disgust. A few men stepped forward. We are not letting him get away with this. We will help you rebuild. Frank's throat tightened. He had spent 30 years working for a company that tossed him aside, and now, after just a few weeks, people were standing up for him. By the end of the day, the shop was cleaner than ever. Someone donated tools. Another dropped off a new register. The town had spoken. Greg had tried to destroy them. Instead, he had given them more strength. But Greg was not finished yet. That night, as Frank locked up, he noticed a car parked across the street, Headlights off. A figure sitting inside, watching. Frank turned to Tom. We need to be ready. He is not done. The next morning, Frank arrived at the shop early, his mind still on the car that had been watching them the night before. He had a feeling this was far from over. As he stepped inside, a sense of determination settled over him. Greg could try to scare them, try to break them, but he would not win. Tom arrived a few minutes later, carrying 2 coffees. You sleep at all? Frank chuckled, shaking his head. Too much on my mind. Tom handed him a cup. Well, get ready, because we are about to get real busy. Frank frowned. What do you mean? Tom smirked, pulling out his phone. People are talking, Frank. Words spread all over town about what happened. They know what Greg did, and they are done with him. I have been getting messages all morning. People want their cars fixed, and they want you to do it. Frank barely had time to respond before a car pulled up. Then another, and another. Within minutes, the lot was full. One man stepped forward, shaking Frank's hand. I have been going to Greg for years, but not anymore. I am not giving my money to someone who tries to destroy honest people. A woman behind him nodded. Same here. He charged me for a repair I didn't even need. I should have come here sooner. Frank looked at the growing crowd, overwhelmed. People were not just bringing their business, they were bringing their trust. For the next few hours, Frank and Tom worked nonstop, fixing cars, changing oil, replacing tires. Every time Frank looked up, more cars were pulling in. The shop was alive in a way he had never imagined. Then, just as Frank was wiping his hands on a rag, a familiar black luxury car pulled into the lot. Greg. He stepped out, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he just stood there, watching the busy shop, the happy customers, the life buzzing around him. Then he walked up to Frank. You proved your point. Frank crossed his arms. Did I? Greg exhaled, glancing around. You took everything I built. Frank shook his head. You destroyed what you built. I just gave people another option. Greg stared at him for a long moment. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his car. As he drove away, Frank felt something he had not felt in weeks. Peace. Tom clapped him on the back. You did it, Frank. Frank looked around at the shop, the people, the life they had created. No, he said, smiling. We did it. The lesson from this story is powerful. Integrity and hard work always win in the end. Frank dedicated 30 years of his life to his work, only to be discarded without a second thought. But instead of giving up, he stood his ground, rebuilt himself, and earned the respect of an entire town. His journey proves that when you do the right thing, people notice, and support will come in ways you never expect. Greg, on the other hand, thought power and greed would protect him. He believed he could destroy someone's future without consequences. But in the end, he lost everything. Not because Frank fought him, but because his own dishonesty caught up with him.
I hope you enjoyed this thrilling journey. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Let me know in the comments below. Your feedback inspires more epic tales.